The city burned, but the silence was louder. Smoke curled through the shattered skyline, the last echoes of resistance fading beneath the heavy boots of conquest. High above it all, Empress Salura Vaz stood unmoving, her crimson gaze surveying the ruin she had created. Fear. This was the language of the Crimson Legion, the currency of her empire. It had never failed her, until now, because amid the kneeling, trembling prisoners, one man stood. Not cowering, not pleading, smirking. Callum Rains, a rebel without an army, a prisoner without chains, looked at the most feared woman in the galaxy and said the one thing no one had dared before. Well, I've had worse Mondays. The warlord stiffened, waiting for his death. But Saylara, she hesitated, and that was how empires began to crumble. Before we start, please, subscribe to the channel by clicking the car button on the top right corner now. And hit the notification bell so you can get amazing daily stories as and when published. Please do comment your views about the story or any topic that you want to get a story on. We'll make it happen. Let's dive into the story. The city of Valus burned, its once majestic skyline now reduced to jagged silhouettes against the churning, violet-tinted clouds. Smoke slithered through the ruins, curling around shattered buildings like the lingering ghosts of a civilization that had met its brutal end. The air carried the acrid bite of scorched metal and the unmistakable scent of defeat. Empress Salura Vaz stood at the edge of the devastation, her platinum armor gleaming in the flickering glow of distant fires. She was a vision of authority, her presence alone commanding silence among her legion. The heavy crimson cloak draped over her shoulders billowed slightly in the heat wave, but she remained motionless, surveying the scene with the calculating gaze of a ruler accustomed to victory. Another world conquered, another rebellion crushed before it could fester. And yet, something gnawed at the edges of her mind, an unfamiliar unease she couldn't quite name. Her crimson gaze swept over the line of prisoners kneeling in the dirt before her, hands bound, heads bowed in submission. Fear clung to them like a second skin. They knew what was coming. They always did. Some were weeping, others shaking, but none dared to look at her. None except one. A man stood among them, unshackled, his posture relaxed despite the destruction surrounding him. His uniform was torn and stained with soot, yet he showed no sign of distress. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't pleading. He was smirking. Saylara took a slow step forward, the sound of her armored boots against the cracked pavement cutting through the silence. The guards flanking her stiffened, sensing the weight of the moment. She stopped before him, tilting her head slightly. "Do you find something amusing, Rebel?" The man, lean, with dark tousled hair and a sharp, undeniably roguish face, shrugged as if the question was absurd. "I mean, yeah, bit dramatic, don't you think?" He gestured vaguely to the burning city around them. The whole merciless empress surveys her latest conquest thing? Classic villain move. Gotta respect the commitment. A murmur rippled through the guards. The audacity. General Kale, a brute of a man clad in obsidian war armor, took a menacing step forward, voice a low growl. "You dare mock the Supreme Arbiter?" The man held up his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa, big guy, easy now. I'd hate for you to pull a muscle flexing like that." Saylara's lips twitched, barely, but enough. This man had no idea what kind of fire he was playing with. She could crush him with a thought, silence his tongue with a flick of her wrist. And yet she didn't. Instead, she studied him. "You should be on your knees like the others." He arched a brow, looking down at the dirt before shaking his head. "Yeah, kneeling's not really my thing. Terrible for the spine. I do yoga sometimes, but that's a different story." A dangerous silence stretched between them. The guards were waiting for the inevitable, the swift execution, the final gasp of another defiant fool who had dared to challenge the Empress of the Crimson Legion. And yet, Saylara found herself hesitating. She didn't know why. and that unsettled her more than his words. Her fingers curled slightly at her side. "What is your name?" He gave her a two-fingered salute, utterly unfazed by the raw power standing before him. "Callum Rains, at your service." "Well, not really, but you get the idea. You are either the bravest or the most foolish creature I have ever encountered." Callum smirked. "Why not both?" The amusement in his voice sent a ripple of disbelief through the gathered soldiers. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. There were rules to these moments: fear, submission, silence. No one had ever stood before her with sheer, relentless irreverence. Selara took a slow breath, considering. It would be easy to end him here. Quick, effortless. And yet, something about him gnawed at her, an unfamiliar itch she couldn't scratch. Her decision was made in an instant. "Take him to the flagship," she ordered, her voice even, unyielding. "I will deal with him personally." A stunned silence followed. Callum whistled. "Oof. Personally, huh? You know, normally I'd be flattered, but I get the feeling this is one of those bad news situations." Selara turned sharply, her cloak flaring behind her as she strode toward her waiting warship. She ignored the growing sense of intrigue curling at the edges of her mind. This was nothing, just another prisoner. The ironclad was unlike anything Callum Rains had ever seen. It wasn't just a ship. It was a floating fortress, a behemoth of metal and power stretching nearly 20 kilometers long. Its hull was an unbroken sheet of blackened steel, veins of crimson energy pulsing beneath the surface like the lifeblood of a living entity. The corridors hummed with an eerie, calculated efficiency, the very air thick with the weight of absolute control. And yet, despite the overwhelming sense of impending doom, Callum couldn't help but admire the architecture. "Gotta say," he mused as two heavily armed guards escorted him through the warship's corridors, "this place has a real final boss kind of vibe. All the dark, brooding walls, the ominous red lights, really leans into that whole merciless empire aesthetic. Very on brand." One of the guards grunted, shoving him forward. "Less talking," the other snapped. Callum sighed. "See, that's the problem with you dystopian overlord types. No sense of humor. No appreciation for a good one-liner." The guards ignored him, marching him deeper into the heart of the ship. The air around him was cold, sterile, devoid of anything remotely human. It was clear this wasn't a place for life. It was a machine, a war engine built to conquer, to break, to consume. Still, Callum walked as if he were on a casual tour, his eyes sweeping across the endless rows of control panels, towering soldiers in precision-formed armor, and the occasional AI drone hovering ominously overhead. Then he noticed the whispers. Not loud, not rebellious, just curious. Soldiers exchanged brief glances as he passed. Engineers in the lower decks slowed their work for half a second longer than they should have. Even the surveillance drones, programmed for unwavering compliance, seemed to linger just a little too long. "Oh, that's interesting." Before he could dwell on it, the guards came to an abrupt stop in front of a massive door. One of them pressed a sequence into a glowing panel. The door slid open with a hiss. Callum let out a low whistle. "VIP treatment already? I must be making an impression." The guards didn't respond. They shoved him inside, and the door sealed shut behind him. The room was sleek, dimly lit, and, he had to admit, kind of intimidating. The centerpiece was a high-tech interrogation chair, all reinforced steel and embedded restraints, hovering weightlessly above the ground. Suspended in the air, it looked like a throne designed for suffering. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. Callum turned his head and found himself face to face with Empress Selara Voss. She stood near the far end of the chamber, arms crossed, crimson eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and cold calculation. The glow of the energy panels illuminated the metallic sheen of her armor, casting sharp, dangerous angles across her face. "You are remarkably at ease for a man in your position," she observed. Callum grinned. What can I say? I have a gift for compartmentalizing existential dread. Saylara took a slow step forward. You believe this is a game? Oh, absolutely. High stakes, terrible odds, the looming threat of instant death. It's basically my life story. She studied him in silence. Then, after a long moment, she gestured to the interrogation chair. Sit. Callum arched a brow. Gonna buy me a drink first? Or do we just skip to the torture and threats phase? Saylara's expression didn't change. You're not bound. You're not being forced. Sit. Callum hesitated. That was unexpected. There were rules to how these moments played out. He was the defiant prisoner. She was the ruthless empress. At this point, he should be getting dragged, shackled, and beaten into submission. Instead, she was asking. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Well, when you put it that way. He walked forward, plopping himself into the chair, arms draped casually over the armrests. The restraints flickered to life around his wrists and ankles. Not tight, not painful, just a presence, a silent reminder of who held control. Saylara took a step closer. You intrigue me, Callum Rains, she said, voice measured. Most prisoners cower. You deflect. Most beg. You mock. What? Callum tilted his head. You ever consider that maybe fear's just overrated? A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Something unreadable. You believe fear is meaningless? She asked. Oh no. Fear's great. Very useful tool. People do all sorts of stupid things when they're scared. He leaned forward as much as the restraints would allow. But you know what's more dangerous than fear? Saylara's gaze sharpened. Enlighten me. He smiled, slow and knowing. Doubt. For the first time, Saylara didn't have an immediate answer. Callum could see it. The slightest hesitation in her breath, the fractional narrowing of her eyes. He didn't need to break free to know that he had done something far more dangerous than escape. He had made her think, and that was how revolution started. The lights in the interrogation chamber hummed softly, casting long shadows along the cold metallic walls. Callum remained seated, legs stretched out as much as the restraints would allow, a picture of absolute nonchalance. Across from him, Saylara stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze unreadable. You speak of doubt, she said, her voice as even and controlled as ever. And yet, you sit here in chains aboard my ship, completely at my mercy. What exactly do you think you're accomplishing? Callum smirked. Oh, just killing time, meeting new people, seeing the galaxy before I get vaporized. Typical tourist itinerary. Saylara didn't react. She simply observed him, the way a scientist might study a specimen that refused to behave as expected. He wasn't crumbling. He wasn't breaking. That made him dangerous. Most men in your position would be begging for their lives, she continued, or attempting to strike a bargain. But you are amused. Callum leaned back. I mean, in fairness, you do have a top-tier evil there going on here. If I wasn't about to get murdered, I'd probably be impressed. Her crimson eyes narrowed. You believe I will kill you? He raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't you? There was again the smallest hesitation. A breath of silence where there shouldn't have been one. Saylara turned slightly, tapping a control panel on the wall. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a rotating projection of the ironclad, its many decks illuminated in sharp crimson hues. Below it, security feeds cycled through various sections of the ship, engine rooms, barracks, command centers. But Callum's eyes were drawn to one particular feed, the prison block. The other captives. Saylara glanced at him, as if gauging his reaction. Do you know what I find fascinating about humans, Callum? He let out a low whistle. We look great in prison lighting. She ignored him. Your kind fights even when the battle is already lost. You resist even when resistance is futile. It is stubborn, illogical. Callum exhaled, resting his head against the chair. Yeah, we do have a habit of making really bad decisions, don't we? He let the moment settle before adding. But tell me something Empress, why are you asking me all these questions? You already have the answers, don't you? Her lips pressed together ever so slightly. Callum grinned. Oh, you don't, do you? Salara's fingers curled at her sides. Careful, Reigns. He shrugged. Just saying, for someone who rules an empire through fear, you sure seem awfully interested in the opinions of a guy who's supposed to be afraid of you. She moved swiftly then, stepping closer, her presence imposing, her voice a control blade. Do not mistake curiosity for weakness. He met her gaze without flinching. Oh, I wouldn't dare. But you know what I do mistake it for? He tilted his head slightly, smirking. Doubt. Something flickered behind her eyes. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift in her expression. She turned away abruptly, shutting down the hologram with a wave of her hand. Return him to his cell, she ordered. The guard stepped forward, but Callum remained still, watching her as she walked toward the exit. Hey, Empress, he called after her. Just curious, how long do you think an empire built on fear actually lasts? She didn't answer. She just left. And for the first time in her reign, she didn't know why she hesitated. The walk back to his cell was quieter than before. No harsh orders, no threats, no guards shoving him forward. The usual intimidation tactics seemed unnecessary now. Callum strolled along like he had all the time in the world, taking in the towering corridors of the ironclad with a casual air. The walls pulsed with dark crimson circuitry, humming with energy, a living monument to the power of the Crimson Legion. Yet, despite the ship's oppressive presence, something had changed. The silence wasn't just in the hallways. It was in the people. Guards stole quick glances at him. Engineers at their stations whispered behind their hands. Even the towering AI drones that floated overhead seemed to linger, their glowing optics tracking his movements just a second too long. Callum smirked. Oh, it was happening. By the time they reached his cell, the guards didn't even bother shoving him inside. The energy field crackled to life the moment he stepped in, locking him behind an impenetrable force barrier. General Kale loomed outside, his crimson-plated armor gleaming under the flickering lights. The man was built like a war machine, his face twisted into a permanent scowl. You are a pest, Kale growled. And pests do not last long on this ship. Callum plopped down onto the metal bench, stretching his legs. Ah, Kale, buddy. I was starting to think you liked me. Kale stepped closer, fists clenched. The Empress may tolerate your insolence, but I do not. Keep talking, and I will make sure your last breath is spent choking on your own words. Callum whistled. Wow, poetry. I didn't know you had it in you. Kale's eyes flashed with fury, but before he could lunge, a smooth mechanical voice interrupted. Advisory, unauthorized aggression toward detainees is not recommended. Callum turned toward the floating AI probe hovering just outside the cell, its purple optics blinking in a rhythmic pattern. Well, if it isn't beep boop, Callum mused. Back to checking on me. The probe emitted a sharp beep. Correction, designation is X-17. Purpose, oversight of organic detainees. Inquiry, why are you still speaking? Callum grinned. You wound me, X. I thought we were bonding. Kale shot the probe a glare. This man is a virus, X-17. He spreads disorder. If you were truly efficient, you would have already flagged him as a threat. The AI words softly, considering the words. Observation. The detainee's words have altered behavioral patterns among the crew. Analysis. Influence is measurable, but does not meet parameters for immediate action. Callum sat up, raising an eyebrow. Wait, you're saying people are actually listening to me? The probe beeped. Affirmative. Kale stiffened, his jaw tightening. Enough. His voice was sharp, commanding. The Supreme One will decide his fate soon enough. With that, he turned and stormed down the corridor, his heavy boots echoing against the steel floor. Callum leaned back, glancing at the AI probe. Be honest, beep boop, he said. You're starting to like me, aren't you? The probe hovered in place for a long moment before emitting a single beep. Callum grinned. Oh yeah, he muttered to himself. This is getting fun. The command deck of the ironclad was silent. Not the disciplined silence of a well-oiled war machine, but something else. Something unnatural, uncertain. Salara sat upon her throne-like command chair, gazing at the glowing red tactical display before her. The Zirian sector flickered on the screen, the crimson dot marking the latest rebellion. Normally, she wouldn't have hesitated. A swift and brutal strike would reassert control, silence any whispers of resistance before they grew into something more. And yet, she hadn't given the order. She could feel the weight of her general's eyes on her, waiting for the command that should have come instantly. And worse, she could feel Callum's eyes on her too. So, his voice cut through the tense silence, smooth and irreverent as ever. You're gonna do the usual scorched earth thing, huh? Send a fleet. Wipe them out. Remind the galaxy why no one dares to question the mighty Empress. Salara didn't move. That is the logical course of action. Callum leaned casually against the railing, arms crossed. Yeah, logical, efficient, merciless. But here's the thing. He tilted his head, giving her that insufferable smirk. It's also predictable. She finally turned her gaze toward him, and the weight of her stare could have crushed a lesser man. Predictable? He nodded. Oh yeah, the rebels know exactly what you're going to do. The entire galaxy does. They've seen this play out 100 times before. Fear works until it doesn't. One of the warlords, a brute of a man named Kale, stepped forward, voice laced with venom. This is nonsense. The Supreme One does not hesitate. We crush insurrection before it spreads. Callum raised a hand. Right, classic kill them all strategy. Super original. But tell me, Kale, how's that been working out for you? He gestured toward the tactical display. That little blinking dot over there? That's a rebellion. And it's happening because people are willing to die just to prove they won't kneel. So tell me, how much longer do you think you can keep stomping people down before they stop fearing you and start hating you? Kale's fists clenched. Fear is control. Callum chuckled. Fear is temporary. Salara watched him carefully, her fingers tightening slightly against the armrest. And what do you suggest, Callum? That I let them defy me? He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Nah, just try something different for once. A silence stretched across the room. The kind of silence that wasn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of something else. Possibility. Salara's gaze flicked toward the screen again. The flashing crimson that marked yet another uprising. Her instinct screamed at her to crush them, to remind them why she was feared. But Callum Rains was watching her, waiting, and for the first time in her rule, she hesitated. She took a slow breath, the weight of the decision settling over her like an unspoken challenge. Then she turned to her fleet commander. Hold position. A ripple of disbelief spread across the deck. Kale's eyes widened in shock. The officers exchanged quick, stunned glances. No one spoke. No one breathed. Callum let out a low whistle. Well, he murmured, that's new. A ripple of disbelief spread through the command deck like a silent shockwave. The warlords stood frozen, as if they hadn't truly heard what had just come from Salara's lips. Hold position. The words were foreign, unnatural, a phrase that had never once been uttered under her rule. Kale's nostrils flared, his voice a low growl. Supreme One, you cannot be serious. Salara remained seated, her expression unreadable, eyes still fixed on the flashing rebellion marker on the tactical display. I do not repeat myself, General, she said coolly. But Kale took a step forward, fists clenched at his sides. This is a mistake. We do not hesitate. We do not grant our enemies the luxury of doubt. These rebels need to be eradicated before. Salara finally turned to him, and the force of her crimson gaze made him halt mid-step. Before what? She asked, her voice steady but sharp. Before they rise against us? Kale straightened, jaw tightening. Before others see weakness. Salara rose from her throne in one smooth motion. The air around her seemed to vibrate with restrained energy, the weight of her presence alone pressing down on the room. She took a step forward, then another. Kale, for all his bravado, did not move. "Do you believe me weak, Kale?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. The general swallowed hard. "Of course not, Supreme One." Then perhaps," she continued, "it is not my strength you doubt. Perhaps it is your own." A muscle twitched in his jaw, but he said nothing. Callum, leaning casually against a nearby console, let out a low whistle. "Well, damn," he murmured. "That was brutal." Saylara shot him a glance, but there was no true anger behind it. If anything, there was something else in her expression, something neither of them had words for just yet. Kale stepped back, his posture rigid, but the damage was done. The silence that followed wasn't just tense, it was telling. Doubt. It had spread, not just among the crew, but within the very heart of the Crimson Legion. Callum exhaled, shaking his head. "You feel that?" Saylara didn't respond. He gestured around the command deck, at the officers still standing in stunned silence, at the tension in the air that wasn't just disbelief, but something deeper. "This is what happens when people start thinking," Callum continued. "It's contagious. One person asks a question, and suddenly, a whole damn empire realizes they don't have the answers." Saylara turned away, her gaze distant. "You think this changes anything?" He smiled, slow and knowing. "I think it already has." She didn't reply, because, for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure he was wrong. The galaxy didn't know what to do with peace. The Tarasi rebellion had expected annihilation. They had prepared for their last stand, believing that their deaths would serve as a symbol for future resistance. Instead, they were met with silence. No warships, no orbital strikes, no crimson-armored legions storming their cities. And then came the transmission. Saylara's voice, cold yet resolute, carried across the sector. "I will not destroy you. I will not rule you. The Dominion is changing. If you wish to fight, fight, but you will no longer be fighting against me." For the first time, an empire built on fear had hesitated, and the galaxy took notice. On the ironclad, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't spoken aloud, not yet, but it was there, in the careful glances between soldiers, in the hushed conversations in the corridors, in a way even the warlords shifted uneasily in their stance. Something had shifted, and it had started with a single prisoner who refused to be afraid. Callum sat in Saylara's private chambers, boots propped up on an ornate black table that probably cost more than an entire fleet of ships. He swirled the deep crimson liquid in his glass, eyeing it with curiosity. "Gotta admit," he mused, "I thought Overlord whiskey would be, I don't know, a bit more ominous. Tastes pretty good, though." Saylara stood near the viewport, arms folded, watching the void of space stretch endlessly before them. "This is not a permanent arrangement," she said, not turning to face him. Callum grinned. "Oh, I'm sure. You'll go back to being terrifying any minute now." Her fingers twitched slightly, but she said nothing. He set his glass down, leaning forward slightly. "So what now? You gonna declare a kinder, gentler dictatorship? Send out apology fruit baskets to all the planets you've crushed?" She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You mock what you do not understand." "Understand just fine," Callum said, his voice softer this time. "You're trying to rewrite a story that's been told the same way for centuries. That's not easy." A silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Saylara let out a slow exhale, almost amused. "You are insufferable." Callum grinned. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The ironclad, once a harbinger of destruction, drifted through the void, its purpose uncertain for the first time in its long, brutal history. No longer a symbol of fear, no longer a weapon of submission. The galaxy whispered of what had happened, of the Supreme One who chose restraint over bloodshed, of the ship that once brought terror, now holding its fire, and of the prisoner who laughed in the face of an empire and walked away, not just alive, but victorious. Solara watched him carefully, as if trying to decipher the impossible enigma that was Callum Rains. "You will be unbearable about this, won't you?" Callum stretched, smirking. "Oh, absolutely." And for the first time in her reign, Solara Voss smiled. Here is the story ends. If you enjoyed and want to watch more thrilling sci-fi adventures, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Dive into epic battles, explore distant galaxies, and join brave heroes as they fight for survival against impossible odds. Let us know in comments if you want next chapters to publish soon. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and become part of the journey. Together, we'll keep the last light burning. Subscribe now and let the adventure continue.